Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's episode of Something to Talk About Live. My name is Mackenzie Hart. I use they, them pronouns. And like every month, I am going to bring in Jamie Henkel to lead the show.
Hi, Mackenzie. How are you?
Great. Thanks, Jamie. How about you? How are you doing?
Pretty good. I'm glad it's almost Friday and that we're talking about something that's pretty important to you in your life. So I will see you in just a moment.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Henkel. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Vice President of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. Before we get started, I do just want to say happy Passover to anyone who has joined us that celebrates, anyone who is watching this after the fact that celebrates happy Passover, and thank you for being with us. This month, we are going to be talking about all of the ways that music can help, can hurt, can heal us. And we're using an article from Paste Magazine by David Opie titled How Dolly Parton's Jolene Helped Me Through Queer Heartbreak. And I'm really excited to have this conversation and to have this conversation with my team at PFLAG. So I'm going to bring them both in. And Mackenzie, I didn't let you off the hook for long. But Alex, can you introduce yourself to the crowd and say hello?
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm Alex Hart. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Learning and Inclusion Associate at PFLAG, and I'm in Baltimore, Maryland.
Awesome. And could you maybe tell us one thing about music, artists, sounds, songs that you're really keying into right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a huge neo soul fan. So I'm always listening to Ari Lennox, Robert Glasper. But one of my favorite bands, Hiatus Coyote, just dropped 2 new singles from their upcoming album. So that has been on repeat.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Mackenzie, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and also share what are you keyed into right now?
Absolutely. So I'm based in New York City. I'm PFLAG's Learning and Inclusion Manager, and I absolutely love music. So I'm really excited that we're getting to do this show. But there have been so many albums that have come out in this spring, and there are more albums to come. But one album I've been turning to so much is the newest Maggie Rogers album called Don't Forget Me. It's really reminding me a lot of that like mid 2000s era coffee house pop, like Kobe Calais type style that I've just really been loving, especially as the weather is getting warmer.
Wonderful. And I will share, again, Jamie Henkel, pronouns she and her. I'm based in Portland these days, and I am tapped into, in 2016-ish, I created a Pandora station called Nasty Woman, and I've been trying to teach the station to play music that's exclusively performed by women, dating back to like Ella Fitzgerald and really sort of older performers. And I just can't seem to change to anything else. Every time I get in the car, every time I am listening to music while doing chores, it's just what I turn to. So thank you both for sharing. And, we're going to be having a pretty nuanced and emotional conversation, but I think because the article we used really highlighted the role that the album Jolene played in this person's life, I'm wondering if first, and maybe most importantly, if you would share your favorite Dolly Parton song. And Mackenzie, why don't we start with you?
So I'm going to be really basic, especially in context of this episode, but I do think that the song Jolene is one of the best songs ever written. I think that almost every cover of it is so good just because there's something about the melody, there's something about the emotion, and for some reason it's such a specific song, but it's also really versatile in how people can perform it. But a little bit less basic, I guess, is a cover of the song Shine by Collective Soul that Dolly Parton did, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s, that is very bluegrass centered. And something I've realized about myself only in the last couple of years is that I think I actually like bluegrass music a lot more than I thought I did when I was much younger. And I really like that original song. And so Dolly's cover of it is just really, really interesting and really cool.
Yeah, well, and this is where I will share an embarrassing personal anecdote that my parents love to share, which is when I was very small and they told me we were driving through Kentucky to see family in Ohio, they kept talking about bluegrass. And when we got to Kentucky and the grass wasn't literally blue, my little toddler self burst into tears. So that's fun. I also have found that I enjoy bluegrass a lot more than high school me would have guessed. I will share that my favorite Dolly Parton song is a song called Rockin' Years. And she talks about your rocking years, rocking chairs, and rocking babies. Like it's something that describes the complexity of romantic relationships in this way that is so simple but so powerful to me. And it is definitely one of my favorites. And Alex, what about you?
Yeah, I would say 9 to 5. That's my favorite, an anthem right there. And if you couldn't guess, I'm right there with y'all on the bluegrass.
That is awesome. We are a team that was meant to be, I think. And we did acknowledge as we were preparing for this show and as we were sort of talking about this episode that Dolly Parton truly is just one of the greatest of all times, right? Like we can agree that she's an American treasure, really. And there's a lot of different stories about all of the different ways that she has shown up as an ally to people who are LGBTQ plus over the years and for other people who hold marginalized identities. And I'm wondering if we can each share a story of Dolly's allyship that really stands out to you throughout what you do know about her as a person and as an artist. And Alex, why don't you get us started with this one?
Yeah, so I mean, she's been an ally for decades at this point, so I couldn't even really pick just one. But I think that one thing that stood out to me was that consistently she's so non-judgmental and she's so authentic and accepting. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about her allyship. She's consistently all about letting people be who they are, celebrating everybody's individuality. And I love that. And it clearly comes from a genuine place.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Mackenzie?
So a couple of things come to mind. There's one example, which is that she has been so consistently respectful and accepting and loving of LGBTQ plus people. One clear example is her goddaughter, who's actually Miley Cyrus. And I remember at one point Dolly talking about Miley, talking about LGBTQ identities, and honestly, she was getting some of the language wrong, and I was a little bit embarrassed, and I wish that I'd been in the room to have the conversation as an educator. But what really struck me was that while she was getting some things wrong, and maybe she had some questions, what she was leading with was love and acceptance. And that's something that Jamie and Alex, you both know, we talk about in our trainings, that we are all lifelong learners. We are going to be able to learn the language over time and get more familiar with the topics. But we're not always going to have a chance to be loving and be accepting. And I think Dolly is a fantastic example of someone who leads with that and makes sure that that is incredibly important and continue on that learning journey throughout her entire life, as we have seen. And then on a slightly different note, I do think that her focus on literacy and reading is not explicitly queer focused, but in an era of book bans, of lack of access to resources, knowing that Dolly has donated millions and millions and millions of books to people who might not otherwise have access is also just incredibly important, especially when we're thinking about education.
Yeah, thank you, Mackenzie. And I think my example is just a little bit goofier. I feel like I have come across this story in interviews that Dolly participated in. I believe it was written up in one of her biographies. But there's this really phenomenal story of Dolly Parton dressing just like herself, maybe a little bit exaggerated. She says she put on heavier eye makeup. She sort of accentuated her beauty mark and those sorts of things. But she entered a Dolly Parton lookalike contest and lost to a drag performer, and was just so gracious about it and tells this story with like so much joy in her heart that there even could be a Dolly Parton lookalike contest, and that herself, the real Dolly Parton, could possibly lose it. It's just this way that she shows up that is so in tune with the persona that she portrays through that character. So it just always brings joy to my heart to know that not only is she in enough on the joke to participate in something like that, but that when she loses to a drag performer, she's like, I'm going to tell this story. It is so amazing. I am so glad that this happened. Like, they did a phenomenal job, and it just makes my heart warm. Now, on a sort of heavier note, in the article, the author sort of admits that he didn't really listen to Dolly Parton growing up as a young gay man in a small town in the United States, because he, honest to goodness, felt like it was just a little bit too gay, and sort of calls out that internalized homophobia, transphobia, all of the phobias that some of us experience. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to share examples of maybe something that you didn't try when you were younger, or you didn't allow yourself to enjoy when you were younger, because you were nervous about how you thought other people might perceive you. And maybe, Mackenzie, we can start with you on this one.
Yeah, so I have to recognize that I was quite privileged. I had a family who supported me in every different way and helped me to be safe and develop a sense of self from a very young age. And so I didn't really have as many of those kind of middle school, teenage experiences of insecurity and things along those lines. And I recognize that is a real deep privilege. And obviously I did have, smaller thoughts, but I think a lot about how when you're a teenager, it's expected that you're going to rebel against your parents. And so often the story is told like, oh, you're going to listen to hard rock music, punk music, you're going to get into that kind of goth aesthetic. But the thing is, my mom loved punk music. Punk music is her favorite genre. And so some of those types of aesthetics and sounds actually forged my bond deeper with my parents. And so funnily enough, I think that my musical rebellion was actually Madonna, and to an extent pop music inspired by Madonna, because that was just not what was typically played in our house. And so that's kind of how I found some level of rebellion and staking out on something that didn't come as naturally to me.
Yeah. And what about you, Alex?
Yeah, for me, it was really dance. Like, a lot of the dance crazes of like the early to mid 2000s. I was just nervous to do it. I had rhythm, but stiff. I was an anxious, stiff kid. So, I'm leaning with it, I'm rocking with it at the house. And like, I would be so afraid to do that in public because I'm worried about what people will think of me. So I kind of hid that part of myself. And now as an adult, I'm so happy to be able to like go out in public and dance and, don't even care. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's that phrase that gets thrown around, dance like no one's watching. And Mackenzie, I love your sense of rebellion being pop music, because I think in my family, my sister starting to listen to country music was that same, like, well, my parents are hippies and they listen to rock and roll. So how am I going to rebel? I think that plays out in so many people's lives. And I will share that for me, as I thought about this question, I had to reflect quite a bit, because I'm somebody who is straight and cisgender, but for a lot of my life was perceived to be queer because of how I express my gender, because of how I move about in the world. But that was never offensive to me. So I don't think I avoided things or didn't try things or didn't allow myself to enjoy things that were too gay. But I definitely did it with things that were a little bit nerdier. I probably spent too much time thinking about coolness and popularity and those sorts of things. So as an adult, things that I really enjoy, Buffy the Vampire Slayer being an example of something I didn't allow myself to watch until adulthood, because I was so nervous that people would know, they'd find out that I was this huge nerd. And I mean, Buffy is in and of itself like queer, campy, beautiful deliciousness. But I didn't let myself like things like that growing up. I didn't allow myself to enjoy things because that was a piece of myself I was nervous about people knowing. And so this shows up in so many different ways, regardless of who you are and how you experience the world. there are ways that we all get nervous about how other people perceive us. It's like this universal experience that we have. And moving on a little bit, many of the divas that we know and love, like Dolly Parton, but also like Madonna and Beyonce and Cher and Whitney Houston. And so, I mean, so many of these divas that we know are often described as being campy or like falling into the category of camp. And I'm wondering if you can tell the audience a little bit about what that word, camp or campy, means to you. And are there any camp classics that you want people to know about or want people to check out? And Mackenzie, why don't we start with you on this one?
So I could go on and on and on and give an academic answer and do so many different things, but I think that camp and camp value kind of in its simplest term is just complete total absurdism, but with a very unquestionably queer point of view, whether the creator themselves is actually queer or not, but a very that is the lens by which camp is looked at. I think a lot of it is kind of queering narratives that we see. And I think that sometimes being campy is trying to make a statement, but sometimes not making a statement is also the statement. So I think that it can be so many things, but it is that just commitment to absurdity in that very queer way. And this is not necessarily a camp classic because it is still fairly new, but I think that the genre of hyperpop, or at least kind of where it was a couple of years ago, was such an example of kind of modern camp, where it is taking pop music to its most extreme, abrasive, absurd, over the top, and at least a couple of years ago, especially uniquely queer way. I think that we can look back at the new wave music movement in a very similar light, that it is that really over the top, extreme, experimental, absurd type of approach to creating music. And so I highly recommend just learning a little bit about hyperpop if it's unfamiliar to you. And then if you haven't really paid much attention to new wave music in the past, taking a look at that as well.
Thank you. And, you know, as you talk about the absurdism, for me, when I think of things that are campy, when I think of camp, it is oftentimes this really over the top parodying of gender. And to me, what is so crucial and what makes it camp is that parody of gender is meant to take power away from the patriarchy. It's sort of made to make fun of and poke fun of the way that we pigeonhole both men and women. And so that to me is really core to a lot of this. And to do a bit of an homage to where Alex currently lives, whenever I think of camp classics, I think of John Waters, who is a lifelong resident of the city of Baltimore. And for me personally, the films Cry Baby and Hairspray, which went on to inspire a Broadway musical, and then another movie, and then I think maybe even another musical. It's just so many iterations. But those are personal standouts for me. They are films that I watch probably once or twice every year. And I just love them. They're just so wonderful and so silly, and they are absurd and they are over the top, and they do parody gender and all of those things. Now, Alex, what about you?
Yeah, to me, camp is like kind of theatrical, and theatrics that really channel this like confident energy. And that's what I love about it, because it's so like uplifting to me. And for an example of camp, I kind of think back to like maybe Prince's entire career. Like I love to go back and look at some of his interviews that he's done. I mean, campy, hilarious, his performances, all of it. Great.
Yeah. Thank you. And to get even more personal, because we've already gotten a little bit personal, the author made note of all of the different ways that music can make us feel. And if you're willing, if you're able, I'm wondering if you will both share pieces of media that you turn to when you need to process things, when maybe things aren't going so great, when you're not having the easiest of times. What are those resources, those artists, those pieces of media that you turn to? And Alex, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah. When I'm kind of going through something, sometimes I kind of steer away from music because sometimes it can be a little too heavy. So one of the things that I go towards is honestly Real Housewives. It can be, kind of a break for my brain, low stakes. Sometimes when I'm feeling down, I like to just put on a supercut of Karen Huger and Giselle Bryant, shading each other on Potomac. They're so witty, they're so funny, and at the end of the day, they're actually friends. They're good friends. So it's fun to kind of see their quips back and forth. So yeah, that's one of my go-tos.
And what about you, Mackenzie?
So when a few different things. One is actually not music, but there are times where I feel like I just need to cry, that I need to get emotions out, and I often turn back to the movie Lady Bird because it always makes me feel something, and I also always find something new. Like, it's probably my favorite movie. It's inspirational to me on an artistic level, but it really does just hit that raw emotion. And then when there are times that I'm angry or upset or something, I really often turn to Courtney Love's music and her band Hole. There's really nothing like screaming along to the chorus of Violet when you're really upset about something, and so that's often where I go to.
Yeah. Well, and I will admit, I knew the Real Housewives thing, but Mackenzie, we probably have to talk a little bit more about Courtney Love and Hole, and also the Tay-Tay drama right now.
Absolutely.
So we'll have to make some time for that.
We will. I should just tell you right now, because I want everyone to know, but Courtney Love did spit water on me once at a concert, and I can't believe that I didn't lead the conversation with that the first time that we met each other, but needed to share that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, when I think about times in my life that were tough and that I was turning to art and media to help me get through things, the song it was like the hit song of the summer a couple of years ago, Somebody That I Used to Know. It helped me through a really tough breakup in my late 20s. It has helped me through a couple of breakups with friends, not only romantic partners. So it is something that I have turned to in the past that I can belt out word for word, because there's so much pain in that. Like, we used to have this intense relationship, and now you're a stranger to me. And this is a little bit more embarrassing. But one of the other things that I will turn to when I'm feeling down, when I'm not having the easiest of times with it, are the Twilight books and the Twilight movies. There's something about the absurdity and the intensity of that teenage angst and that teenage emotion. And like, there's just something about it that speaks to me when I'm having really big feelings. So I have read those books and seen those movies far more times than I care to admit. And to stop being such a downer, the author also notes that art and music, they have the power to help us and to heal us. And so I'm hoping that we can share pieces of media, pieces of art that we turn to when we're feeling happy and we're feeling whole. And to continue on my shame spiral, I will go first for this one, because something that a lot of people probably don't know about me is that there was, a lifetime ago, I was what one would consider a candy raver, with the bright colors and the beaded bracelets and the furry shoes. And I really, really was. I traveled long distances to see DJs that I loved and cared about. So for me, the things that I turn to when I'm happy and I'm whole, that music that comes to mind is an anthology called Happy to Be Hardcore from a now retired DJ named Anabolic Frolic. I have the whole anthology on CD still. I don't even know that it is available digitally beyond YouTube. But when I'm really feeling myself, when I'm feeling good about the world, those are the CDs that come out, and I bounce around to them at 190 beats per minute. So, Alex, what about you?
Yeah, mine is Janelle Monáe's The Age of Pleasure. That whole album is so much fun. I'm still like on cloud nine from going to the concert last year. So that album, amazing. As soon as the first song Float comes on, I'm floating. It's my favorite.
Yeah. I will have to check that out. I don't know that I'm familiar with more than just singles from Janelle Monáe. So I love an album that you can listen to start to finish. Now, Mackenzie, what about you?
So I can't believe I didn't think of this when we were talking about camp, but the Chucky TV show is so good, and it is pure camp value. Chucky, the serial killing doll. Great time. Talk about just queer lens and absurdity. It just stacks every Chucky movie on top of each other and just continues as though it's all completely normal, no matter how deranged the plot is. This season takes place in the White House. That's all I'm going to tell you. But I also turned to Carly Rae Jepsen's music over this shoulder. You can see very, very small that I have one of her albums that my friend Max got signed for me when she did a signing actually in Portland, Oregon. So very love all of her music, and she makes great music to feel really happy to.
Thank you. And I, again, knew the Carly Rae Jepsen, didn't know Chucky. So we're going to have to connect lots of dots. And we have gotten to some of this already, but as we start to wrap up, I'm wondering if there are any other LGBTQ plus or there are any ally artists that you'd recommend people check out, that you really want to help people get connected with new music that can heal them, can hurt them, or can help them to make it to tomorrow. Mackenzie, why don't we start with you?
So right now she is having a real true moment, but if you haven't listened to Chappell Roan yet, highly recommend. I think that she's on a really immense momentum path in her career right now, really truly blowing up in a way that I don't think we see all that often anymore from many artists. And so highly recommend it. Her entire album, The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess, is fantastic. She's a great live performer if you can get tickets. And then another artist who does not label his sexuality, but I think has a very intense queer lens in several of his songs, like Heather and Found Heaven, is Conan Gray. I really like a lot of his music, and his most recent album is kind of like a take on like I was saying, new wave 80s kind of Fantasia, and I think it's excellent. So I highly recommend taking a look at both of them.
Yeah, and I'm going to share that for me, somebody that I am constantly recommending people check out is Girl in Red, Norwegian Gen Z queer indie pop performer whose music is 100% not meant for me, but I love it. I think more people should get to know Girl in Red, and the song I Need to Be Alone is just an absolute banger that speaks to every introvert's hearts and dreams. So that is what I would recommend. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, I would say Cam Franklin. She's the lead singer of The Suffers, but she does solo work also. And she recently released a song, Bird and Shepherd, dedicated to James Byrd Jr. and Matthew Shepard. And it's a beautiful, beautiful song.
That's wonderful. And okay, last but not least, this is going to be a pretty quick one. If we're going to predict the future together, if we're going to try and make a guess, do you have any thoughts on what this year's Pride anthem is going to be? Alex, why don't you go first?
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but Janet Jackson said she's coming with new music. So my Pride anthem is going to be whatever she puts out.
Got it. What about you, Mackenzie?
I think, like I just mentioned, Chappell Roan, her most recent single is, I think, could be positioned to be a Pride anthem, but I also think that Two Most Wanted, Beyonce and Miley Cyrus's collaboration, has a chance to be kind of like a ballad for Pride. But my money is actually on Billie Eilish, because Billie Eilish has recently talked much more about her kind of queer experiences, and she's going to be releasing a new album, and I think that she is really well positioned to release a Pride banger, and I'm hopeful and excited to see what happens there.
Yeah, and I shouldn't have gone last for this one, because I'm not even going to venture a guess. If you had told me years ago that a song from a musical about P.T. Barnum was going to be like the Pride anthem of the summer, I would have called you a liar. I have no guesses. I've got nothing. So I probably shouldn't have gone last for that one. But with that, we are going to conclude this month's Something to Talk About Live. Thank you both so much for being a part of today's conversation. I will see you next time. All right. And thank you all so much, everybody, for being with us for this month's Something to Talk About Live. We'll be back in May, and we hope that you will join us. And thank you so much for being with us.